On today's episode of Photo Kitchen, I put on a pair of gloves, get out into the snow, and even do a little bit of a fashion show. Hello and welcome to episode 273 of Photo Kitchen. I'm your humble host, MD Welch, and today on the menu, we're not talking about photo gear, we're not reviewing video techniques or sharing preferences. We're actually doing a little bit of fashion, because when you think Photo Kitchen, you think fashion. Actually, what we're going to do on today's episode is talking about the winter gear or cold weather gear that you need as a photographer so you stay dry, warm, and safe during any temperature condition. Now, I do want to stress at the very beginning of this video, none of the brands that I'm going to mention sponsor me. They don't know that I'm doing this. So all of this is gear that I own, and I will give you some tips or tricks for other brands, but I'm also not super brand specific, other than to say that I have a Patagonia outlet in my town. So I have a fair amount of Patagonia gear because it's readily available and usually affordable. And that leads to a very good first point to make here in this fashion forward edition of Photo Kitchen. No matter what time of year you're watching this, if you're going to work out in cold conditions, you need to be thinking about what gear, because either you're in the wintertime and you need to think about it now, or you need to be taking advantages of sales and purchases. Almost everything that you see on the table, and there's a lot, including shoes that are down on the floor, have been purchased off season or on sale or on clearance sales. There's a lot of value there, so make sure that you take advantage of it. So staying warm as a photographer is a very difficult task because we're both trying to stay warm and dry, but also manipulate a camera, and that creates a lot of challenges. Now, I'm going to apologize also for all the dog hair that's flying around because I have two huskies and I go out with them a lot, wearing a lot of this stuff. So memories are flying through the air right now. It's fur confetti. One thing to keep in mind though, when you're doing photography, is you could essentially boil down photographers into three different categories. Not a very big group, but a group to talk about are the active photographers, those that are doing the same winter activity as the subject that they're capturing. So this is people doing maybe fashion or lifestyle work. They're following snowshoers, they're following cross-country skiers, and they're trying to stay warm. It's not all that common, but there's a lot of things that we can learn from that type of activity. So we're going to talk about how to prepare for that. The most common activity, though, for most photographers is the stand around photographers. And that is one of the hardest things to prepare for because you're going to have to really talk about keeping the warmth in because you're not generating any heat. But even worse than the type 2 photographer are the third type of photographers. And those are photographers that are hiking or snowshoeing to a location and then standing around and waiting, because you have to prepare for number one's issues, but also take into account number two's issues. So there's a lot to cover here, and I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, but we're going to dive right into it. We're going to start with the extremities first. Most people start, when they talk about layering systems, they talk about the base layers. We're going to start with the extremities because that's where photographers need to focus their attention first. And I'm going to start with the feet. Feet are something that are going to get cold really easily as a photographer, especially if you're in that second group where you're standing around a lot. And the one downside to cold feet is you cannot get them warm again unless you introduce a heat source or you somehow change what you're wearing on your feet or really increase the activity. Once those feet are cold, they are going to be cold. So you have to overdo the protection on your feet. Now, obviously, we're talking about wool, socks, no cotton, please, thick socks, maybe even 2 pairs of socks. But you also really need to think about the shoes as well. These are my go-to everyday waterproof Gore-Tex hikers. They have insulation in them. These are terrible for winter work, especially if you're standing around. Even if you're active, I wear these snowshoeing from time to time. My feet always get cold with these shoes because the snow stands on top of them and there's just not enough insulation or enough insulation to keep your feet warm. So even though that you have a warm pair of hiking boots that maybe your feet get really warm all the time in the spring or the fall, it's not going to cut it for winter work. Now, you do have the tried and true leather hunting boots. These are great. This has Gore-Tex and Thinsulite insulation. It's a very warm boot, big, thick sole here. So that's going to keep a lot of that cold from creeping up into your feet. The problem with leather is once the leather gets wet, it can become saturated. That's going to make your foot cold. And if you're in really cold temperatures, the leather will freeze. Now, usually it freezes overnight, but sometimes if you're in super cold conditions, it will freeze while you're wearing it. So you don't want that. I would say this is good to, right around from the, single digits in Fahrenheit. I'm going to do everything in Fahrenheit. I apologize for that, but I'm in the US. But anything getting below that, the boots might literally freeze. Even if you treat the leather, and you should treat the leather so water doesn't absorb into it too well or too much, this boot is not ideal for cold conditions. Now, a lot of people will grab these boots. This is the OG bean boot, the main hunting boot. And this is a very good design. The problem is there's just not enough insulation. The rubber boot is good, or the rubber bottom is good for slushy conditions. So I would say, like, in that kind of shoulder season or hybrid, it's still some warm, or it's going to get warm. This is great. This is their warmest version of it. It's very much like the leather boot. It has insulation as well as Gore-Tex. So it'll keep your foot warm-ish, and it will definitely keep it dry. But there's really no insulation, especially down here in the rubber, and the rubber will get cold fast. The reason why I show you this boot is because there are other boots similar to this. They are called pack boots, made famous by a company called Sorel. There's all sorts of versions of these things. It's a big, chunky rubber bottom in either leather or canvas on the top, usually canvas for extreme cold. But what makes those boots so warm is there's a big, thick wood felt sole, as well as a big wool liner on the inside, and that will keep your feet warm. Regardless of whatever type of boot that you're going to buy in maybe that category, always get a size, maybe even 2 bigger, to accommodate for your thicker socks. But also, and this is something I'm going to mention a lot in this video, space equals warmth. The more air that you have in an area, the warmer you're going to be. That's why really good insulation, what makes it really good is it has so much space for air to be trapped. And once you get that air warm, it will stay warm. So don't get tight-fitting shoes in the wintertime, because even if you have a really warm boot, the tight-fitting boot will make your feet a lot warmer. Now, the boots that I'm currently wearing right now for my snowshoeing and my location work are these Keens. These are Revel, I think, polar boots. Again, a little bit of leather here, a whole lot of insulation. These are supposedly, according to Keen, rated for -40. I don't believe that for 1 second, mostly because temperature ratings are usually for survivability. So in Keen's world, I don't lose my toes at -40. I probably have severe frostbite, or at least a serious case of hypothermia going on because of cold feet, but I have a survivability here. I'm not comfortable. And when you're not comfortable, you're not going to photograph well. I point that out because a lot of times these temperature ratings are hyped up. So do your research on this. There's all other styles of boots. There are slip-on boots. Muck is a good company to look at. They make boots that go to -40, -60. It's all one piece, no laces. Just slide them on. Probably not really comfortable for walking, but if you're that photographer that's just walking from your car and standing around, do you care? There's also, if you go to military surplus stores, you might be able to still find, and I kid you not, Mickey Mouse or bunny boots. These are giant rubber boots with a whole lot of that wool insulation and also air pockets throughout the boot. You will have super, not even sweaty feet, just wet feet, like you put them in a bathtub when you're done wearing these boots, because they do not ventilate at all. So you have to keep that in mind, but they are very warm. They're also very expensive. So no matter what winter boot that you're looking at, if you don't have the money for it, and even on sale, these boots can cost a couple of $100s. So if you're trying to save money, or you're trying to extend, say, a boot like this in cold conditions, you can do something like this. You could go get yourself a closed foam a pad. This is a Thermarest Ridge Rest, old school sleeping pad. And you could either take the whole pad or cut it up and stand on it. And now you have that layer of insulation. And believe it or not, it's just the standing on the cold ground that's going to make your feet cold. A lot of times it's not the elements. At a certain point, the snow and the wetness, not going to be nearly as a factor as that heat transfer between your foot and the ground. So while it's really silly looking, a closed foam pad or a sleeping pad might work out well for you. If you have somebody, or you know somebody has one lying around and they don't mind you cutting a chunk out of it, there you go. Or take the whole thing and be able to maybe sit in the snow as well. Moving from feet to hands, and hands are even more critical for photographers than feet, because we need that dexterity to manipulate those dials and buttons on cameras. So these chunky, very cool Gore-Tex insulated gloves, probably not going to work. Yeah, you could take them off and manipulate the camera and still trigger or hit the shutter button with these. These even have the touch version so you can control on your iPhone, but that taking on and off could get your hands really cold really fast, especially if there's nothing underneath. So I would avoid something like this. Something I carry around with me all the time, this is a Patagonia fingerless glove for fly fishing. This is in my bag along with a hat for winter and a hat for summer. Even in mildly cool conditions, I will put these on because whatever the temperature of the air, that's going to be the temperature of your camera body pretty much. So you could be holding on to something very cold. 40 degrees doesn't feel cold to your hands, but it can be very cold when you're holding onto a camera. So I use these. Not going to be ideal or great for cold or very cold conditions. So there you got to think about some sort of glove like this. Now there are companies that make camera versions of this, but this is from Black Diamond. And it's pretty simple. You have a fingerless glove that has a mitten pullover here. If it was made for camera work, the thumb would also remove as well. I haven't used any of those camera specific gloves that convert like this. So if you have and you have any experience, let me know down in the comments section below. But this has kept my hand really warm. It's a Polartec wind fleece. So it keeps out the wind pretty well. And I've taken this into 10-degree weather. And as long as I'm moving, this is pretty good, but it's not great for super cold conditions. For that, I have a little bit of my own creation here. I take my fingerless glove and then I grab one of these cool mittens here. Now this is a goose down mitten. It's literally called an oven mitt by Mountain Hardware. They discontinued it. I'm not super happy with this glove. But I got it for like 20 bucks, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Now, the color wasn't up to me. That's what they had. But the nice thing about this is I could slide this on, and now I have a mitten over the fingerless gloves. Mittens are going to keep your hands a heck of a lot warmer. Goose down or artificial down if you don't like goose or don't want to afford goose. The nice thing about this type of loft insulation is it will stay warm even once you pull your hand out. So you can put this back on and you're not putting your hand into a cold glove like you will with something with fleece here. I'm not wild about this. I'm looking for an upgrade, something that's like this, has a little bit of a longer gauntlet, has a leash on the wrist. So I'm not dropping this because white on snow, that's a brilliant idea. But nevertheless, that kind of 1-2 punch might be something that you need when you're working with the camera. An important thing to point out, especially when it comes to buying gear as a small side note, is photographers have a lot of the same issues and need the same solutions as people who hunt or fish. Now, no matter how you feel about people who hunt or fish, a lot of the stores that cater to those people will have items that have a lot of insulation for feet, dexterity for the hands, those kinds of things. And it's worth perusing, especially if you're looking for a deal. Let's wrap up the extremities by talking about the top of your head. I keep it simple. And of course, with husky hair included, I have this windproof fleece hat. Because I'm usually going to wear a hood over this, I don't have anything that's super bulky on the top of the head. Covers the ears. This is by Mountain Hardware. Maybe the best name for any product ever made. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Dome Perignon. Mwah, chef's kiss to the marketing department on that one. I have 2 of these, one that goes hiking with my dogs all the time, as you could probably see, and another one that stays in my bag. I don't have a face covering, but face coverings or the all-inclusive hat face coverings, that might be something to also look at as well. Even if you're in bright sun conditions, it's not a bad idea to maybe even wear a lightweight face covering. Always do sunscreen, but that could be an extra thing to save you from coming home with a bad sunburn because of snow. But I keep it simple. This is great. You could also get this in wool as well, or a hat like this in wool if you want something that maybe doesn't get maybe stinky or is a little bit warmer. But keep it compact because you're probably going to put a hood over your head. So now that we've gotten the extremities out of the way, we could go back to actually talking about clothing. And I'm going to talk about base layers. And I'm going to talk about base layers for all 3 of those conditions. Base layers are one of the most important things that you can purchase for staying warm. And it's where you should really make a significant investment. Not using the right base layer can mean that no matter what you put on top of you, that you are going to be cold. And it's very important to remember this. Base layers are there to keep you dry first, because it's a lot easier to be dry and cold. You could warm up the cold, but if you're wet and cold, it is almost impossible to get warm because you lose that airspace. Remember, I talked about air or space that equals warmth. The minute clothing gets wet, it's not insulating you nearly as well as if it's dry. So a good base layer should keep you dry. Now, I stress that because a lot of times people will be like, oh, it's going to be cold, so I'll just go buy a thick old base layer and I'll wear that around and I'll be warm. No, you'll probably, especially if you're moving around, if you're at that first activity level, you're going to get very, very wet from perspiration. And now you're going to be cold, no matter how good the base layer is. So believe it or not, a lot of times base layers need to be on the lighter side. You have all sorts of materials, you have all sorts of thicknesses. This is a nylon material. This is almost the same consistency or thickness as a rash shirt or a sun shirt. It ventilates really well, keeps me pretty dry, and when it does get wet from perspiration, it dries out really fast. There is, and I don't have an example of it, a resurgence or an introduction to mesh as an insulation. And I'm literally talking about a mesh shirt. You look like an extra from a Lost Boys concert show or the Beyond Thunderdome. But the mesh, the pockets of it, at least the theory is that the pockets in the mesh with a layer on top of it will trap the air and keep you warm. But because there's not a lot of material, it doesn't get wet, and it also dries out fast once it does. Norwegians swear by it. They've been using it for decades for their expedition work, and it's primarily made out of wool, which is good because that's a great insulating value. You have other types of thicknesses. This is a set of leggings. This is midweight. All of this is by Patagonia, by the way, but all sorts of companies offer materials like this. You can even see the beginnings of that pocket-like idea here. This is a midweight. I usually go with midweight in almost all of my situations. This again is a nylon. It's artificial. This is expedition weight or close to expedition weight. This is very, very warm, but also it will heat up really fast. And because of the thickness, this isn't all the way thick as expedition. Because of the thickness though, this will take a while to dry out. I do have some wool stuff. This is actually a wool hybrid. Wool is great because it's a natural fiber. You're not putting more petroleum into the world. That's awesome. It doesn't stink or smell, but since most photographers aren't doing multiple day expeditions, that's not that big of a deal. But it does have a tendency to keep you warmer based upon the same thickness, say, to an artificial material. This is a hybrid material from Patagonia. It's my kind of winter Where's Waldo look here. But nevertheless, it keeps me really warm. But this is about as thick as I want to go. This can get a little too warm too fast, and then again, you're wet, and now you're wet and cold. My advice is mid-weight layers are probably the best, even if you're standing around, unless you know you're at the Arctic Circle, you're watching polar bears, emperor penguins, whatever that it is, and you're not moving at all, then I would think about expedition weight. But the minute you start to move and you start to get wet, you're going to pay the price for it. So do keep that in mind. For me, it's mid-weight, maybe this heavier one in very, very cold conditions. So with base layers out of the way, we could focus on these three activities levels. For the first and third activity level, where there's a lot of activity, you want to focus on a layering system that's going to keep you dry and warm, because you're going to generate heat, you're going to get hot, you're going to sweat. You need to somehow keep that sweat from accumulating and turning into you being wet, which will turn into you being cold. So for some people, they will use a mid layer. This is a good example of a mid layer here. This, again, by Patagonia. It's a fleece. It ventilates really well. So you will feel the wind through this, but it does get that moisture from the base layer into here out. Some people will wear just a mid layer if the conditions are very warm, and I will do that from time to time with this. The benefit of wearing a mid layer on top of having an outer layer is if it starts to get really warm, that you could dump that outer layer and you could have this mid layer here. And the beauty of a layering system is that you could kind of mix and match the base layer with mid layers. A lot of times I will run, say, a very thin base layer with this mid layer, and it's a great combination. And then if it's too warm, I could take off whatever I'm wearing over this and get rid of that extra moisture, or just dump that particular heat. But sometimes you could just get away with the base layer and an outer layer. Now for mid layer on my legs, I rarely, if ever, have to do that. Most of the time, my base layer will keep me warm enough. I'm wearing either a work pant that's hemp-based, no cotton at all, ever on any part of your body. Save that for when you get back to the lodge. Put on your hoodie there, but leave it back at the lodge or in the car. Don't wear it out. So I will wear like work pants that are kind of a hemp material, or like a nylon snow pant that has vents that I could dump the heat from. For your outer layer, for that very active shooter, you have a few different options. The first thing I'm going to tell you is avoid any sort of puffy coats. These are great for maintaining warmth, but they're not great for keeping you dry and warm if you're active. All that's going to happen is you're going to retain a lot of heat, and even if it's a good quality goose down, it's just going to get wet from all of that moisture. So save this for when you've stopped, pack it away, but as far as wearing it out, it's a bad idea. If the conditions are right and it's a little bit windy, you could go with a shell. You could go with a very thin weight, affordable shell. If it's a little bit wet out or it's snowing, you could go with Gore-Tex shell. This is a heavier shell here. Those are ideal. But more often than not, unless you have some sort of rain or snow in the forecast, a soft shell or an active insulation layer is going to work a lot better for you. This is from Arc'teryx. This is their Atom LT. One of my favorite pieces of gear that I bought last year. This thing goes everywhere with me. It's very warm, but it doesn't get too warm. I will wear this in the spring. I'll wear this in the fall. I'll even wear this in like late summer or early summer in mornings where I'm getting ready to go paddleboarding or something like that. This keeps me warm, but again, not super warm. It is dumping a lot of heat. It allows air to come in and out. I've taken this all the way down to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit and been warm with the proper mid layer and base layer on it. But the one problem with active insulation like this is that because air goes in and out for ventilation to dump heat, it is also prone to wind chill. So if you have wind chill in the forecast, you will get cold with active insulation. But you could always put a shell on top of this to keep you pretty warm there, or again, mix and match it. It really depends on your conditions. But you want to, in that first and third category, keep in mind that it's all about dumping the heat. Be bold, start cold. It's better to be cold at the start of your activity and then warm up than it is to be too hot and then have to be dumping a lot of layers. One thing to stress is take this gear out, test it before you go on a photo shoot with it. That way you're not worried about staying warm and dry and trying to make a good photo. So moving from the active photographer to the polar opposite, dad jokes by the way, to the inactive photographer. If you're going to just stand around, you're going from the car, the lodge, the snowcat, the snowmobile, and then you're going to spend hours on end not moving around, you're going to radically have to change what you wear because it's all about now about not dumping heat, but retaining heat. It's all about insulation. So as far as base layers go, you could go with a heavier base layer if you think it's going to help you out, and especially if you know you're not moving, so that expedition or thermal weight might be good for you. I still usually stay with the mid weight, but I definitely spend time on my mid layer. Again, I have this this Patagonia fleece shirt here. This is great because it's still going to ventilate, but it's very warm. For my legs, I have these insulating pants for fly fishing. And I absolutely love them, even though that they look like yoga tights, and I'm going to save you from that particular visual. They do keep me extremely warm. They have a nylon finish on the front, so they do cut down on wind chill cutting in. One thing I like about both of these pieces of gear or fashion or clothing is that if I'm wearing something really heavy on top of it and I'm traveling in a car or I go into a store or something like that, I'm going in and grabbing lunch, I'm not going to win any fashion awards to be sure, but I'm not going to be super hot wearing all of that stuff. So this is a good all-around layer to wear until I walk out into those extremely cold temperatures. But these two items are a must for me when I'm doing any sort of cold work, and you need to think about a really good quality mid-layer. Mid-layers are still getting that insulation in there, but also getting that moisture away from your body as well. So for our last layer, there's a lot of different ways that you could go about it. You could keep it all together. You could split it apart. There's versatility there. There's also more warmth if you keep it together. It just kind of depends on your budget and what you want to do. If you're keeping it apart, you have a lot more options and probably a lot more affordable options. You're first going to think about insulating though. You're going to think about the puffy coat, maybe even puffy pants. That insulation layer keeps in the warmth and keeps out the cold. It's not wicking any moisture away. That's why movement needs to be a minimal, because down will get wet due to sweat, especially when you put some sort of dedicated shell coat and pants on. Preferably something with some waterproofing on there, but something that's a little bit of a heavier. You don't want a lightweight shell here. You want something with a little bit more density to it. It will keep out the wind, it will keep out the moisture, and allow that insulation to work and not be compromised. Now, the beauty of separating the layers is if you get too warm, you could take off the shell, take off the insulation layer, put it into a bag, put the shell back on, and there you go. If you are not in conditions where there's any moisture and you don't want to have the shell on, you could dump the shell and leave the insulation layer on. Plus, there's affordability here. You don't have to buy everything at once. You're not buying a one high-priced item. You could separate these and also customize them as much as you want to. And you could also then use them for other things. They're not limited to just one extreme cold endeavor. And I certainly have these and use these quite a bit, especially if I need them for versatility. Now for extreme cold, I do go in a different direction. I combine my insulation with my outer layer. I just find it to work a little bit better. And the first piece in this particular puzzle are these insulated bib overalls. And I don't know how I made it so far into midlife without knowing about bib overalls, especially insulated bib overalls before. Now, these are Patagonia. This is the literal definition of Patagucci here. This is the workwear line. This is really where a company Carhartt dominates this particular field. The one thing I will tell you though, is make sure that the insulation goes all the way up to the front and back areas of the bib tights. The bib overalls, because you don't want it to stop at the waist. The beauty about having the flaps as you were being insulated is now you have an additional layer over your chest. And you're covering areas that contain a lot of liquid, kidneys, liver, your intestines, and keeping those things warm is going to keep you warmer overall. So bib overalls are a great solution. Now, these are made out of hemp, not cotton. So again, avoid cotton. If you're going with Carhartt or some other brand like that, extreme workwear, maybe nylon is even a better choice. They might even have more insulation, but there's great insulation here. There's nylon where you need it. It's on the seat. It's on the front legs. There's full zips going all the way up so you could get these on easily. I like this little loop that they put here for tools. One of my favorite features about bib overalls is the front pockets. So I could put my phone, I could put batteries in here, unzip the coat, grab a quick battery out of there. It's a little bit easier to get to than going into deep pockets on a coat, and certainly better than having them on external pockets. But I absolutely love these bib overalls. And when I combine that with a good base layer, those fly fishing tights that fit really well inside of this, I have not run into a cold temperature yet that even phases this. And I'm kind of interested to see how cold I can go before I get compromised in this particular setup. So when it comes to coats for these extreme conditions, you have three directions that you could go in. The first, and maybe the best and most versatile, is the mighty parka. Now, if you're buying a parka, there's a few things that you want to look for. First of all, you want it to be very thick as far as insulation and have a strong or thick nylon shell. That's going to keep the warmth in, that's going to keep the moisture or the cold out. It should be fairly long. It should go well past the waistline. So that way, if you're bending over or something like that, you don't have a cold draft going up your backside, if you will. This particular one even has zips on the bottom, so you could zip it down or zip it up to keep yourself warm. It doesn't have a snow skirt. Some parkas do have an internal snow skirt to keep cold air from coming up. This particular one does not, which is odd because it is really overbuilt in all other areas. The faux fur here, and I do know that there are some companies still doing real fur. That's totally your thing. But faux fur here in PhotoKitchen, the faux fur hood thing here is not a cosmetic thing. That actually creates a void in front of your face where warm air will stay and cold air doesn't get in as much. And your face will be warmer with this fuzziness. So don't zip it off. Make sure the hood stays attached. Now, you can find companies making these parkas at all sorts of different price points. You could go into hunting, fishing stores, find good value there. Military surplus stores might have something for you as well. Eddie Bauer, LL Bean, the list goes on and on. This is from North Face. And of course, features are going to up the price. You want something that's insulated. You want something that's heavy duty nylon, but you could also get into, say, goose down insulation, as this parka has. Gore-Tex to keep everything nice and dry as well. I bought this for my girlfriend, and she's yet to run into a condition that she says is cold enough to get through this jacket. It even has inside the sleeves little finger covers in case you forget gloves. They really thought about it all when it comes to this particular coat. They do come at a particular price. So in this case, I bought this again. If I didn't already mention it, during the summertime. It was on sale. I took advantage of that. And that's where you could really find a good deal on parkas. And the traditional parka is really good, but it is limiting because you're not going to walk around in this in any distance without turning into a sauna really quick, really fast. My go-to solution is this. This is a belay parka. And the design of this, or the concept of this, is that you will be mountaineering or rock climbing or what have you, and you'll get done. And then you'll need to put a insulating layer over you while you are belaying your partner. And it is goose down. It is nylon. We'll do a little fashion show here. And it is super, super warm. A little bit of longer sleeves. This one's a little bit tight. And when I say a little bit tight, I mean I need to go to the gym. But nevertheless, this is a super warm coat, even unzipped. It has a big hood. It zips up all the way over the face. And the beautiful thing about this is it compresses down. It is down, it's not artificial insulation. There are some companies, Patagonia makes a DAS parka for dead airspace. That's artificial material, but that's great. Has big, huge, chunky pockets on the inside for keeping water bottles warm as well. This is a fantastic but very expensive item, just like the parka, but you could find more affordable ones, especially at summertime, on sale. But that's my go-to when I wear that over my mid layer, have my hat on, everything like that. I haven't, again, run into a cold temperature that is making an impact on this material. There is the good old-fashioned work coat. This, again, Patagucci, but you could go with Carhartt. Definitely get a hood. This one doesn't have it. But again, a lot of insulation, a good hemp outer layer, maybe nylon. Get a hood on that. The benefit of a work coat is they're usually pretty affordable, and if they get torn or they get beat up, it's not the end of the world. This thing is going to tear by just looking at it wrong. This parka is very expensive. You wouldn't want to make a tear to it, but a good work coat, it's going to first of all not tear as easily as these other two items, but it's also maybe a little bit more affordable, so it's not the end of the world, and you can put some duct tape over it or something like that. The downside of work coats, though, is usually the materials are not great. But check them out. You could find a really good deal and a lot of affordability. So while that wraps up our photographers who aren't moving, what about the photographers who are active and then also inactive? That's going to be tough because you're basically going to have to prepare for both. You're going to have to carry materials that are going to allow you to dump heat, dump that moisture, but then also insulate. So you're unfortunately going to have to probably spend a little bit more money. Down or some sort of artificial down that packs up really well, that could go into your bag, maybe a big belay coat like this. Maybe a smaller down coat. Definitely though, something with a hood. You want to trap that heat around your head as well. Gloves, you're probably gonna have to take along a chunkier pair of gloves and maybe even another pair of insulating pants. Definitely think about taking something, maybe it's just a small chunk of closed foam to stand on. That will keep you warm as well. But if you take what you've learned from the active to the inactive and kind of find that secret sauce, you should be okay in those particular types of conditions. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the PhotoKitchen fashion show as much as I did presenting it to you. If so, please hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And if you know anybody who's out in the cold or going to get out in the cold, or maybe thinking about buying some cold weather gear, please share this with them. And until next time, I'm MD Welch wishing you all the best from PhotoKitchen.